you guys remember, of course, last spring after the quarantine had hit, McGregor kind of did another fake retirement. And then Jon Jones went public with the fact that he was offered the same amount of money to move up and fight the winner of Stipe against Francis as he would have to defend his 205 title against Dom Reyes. We remember the back and forth that him and Dana had. Shortly after that, and I don't even remember this interview, Luke, but he did go on Steve-O's little camper podcast that he's had. And it's wild how much these quotes, which have now resurfaced because it's timely again, still ring true today, not just because Jon hasn't fought since then, but because Jon is back in this open, very public debate of pay me what I'm worth, pay me what I deserve to take on such a crazy challenge. And it is interesting to watch this extensive interview, Luke, and see the quotes where Jones is, coming to life in terms with, I can get my jaw broken, I can get knocked out cold here. I've done the work for 10 years. What if I don't deserve this? What do I deserve? Those type of quotes, which you expect, Luke. But I love the sort of next level quotes where he was basically saying, I want to become a free agent. I'd love for there to be an open market. I'd love to be able to fight for another organization and find out how much I'm worth. And maybe I have to sit out 2 to 3 years to do that, but maybe I'd be willing to do that to help others. And look, it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to do it, right? So let's not put the cart before the horse. But we've been saying that forever. When is change going to happen? When somebody with something to lose stands up and takes a stand. And one key quote in that interview with Steve-O, as we continue to figure out, is the Jones and Ngannou fight happening next? Will UFC produce the money? Is there a middle ground number they could reach? Was Jon saying, maybe if I did sit out 2 to 3 years to make these changes, I'd be remembered for something more than just winning a title. So this was very interesting stuff that, as we mentioned, happened a year ago, but it could fit in right now today. I know Ngannou also had an interview just this past week with TMZ about this topic. So, Luke, as much as nothing's happening, a lot seems to be happening right now as we navigate this. Will this fight happen? I know there's been rumors of the UFC kicking around the idea of doing Derrick Lewis and Ngannou in June. Where do you sort of sit on all things considered Jones and Ngannou right now?
Right. So there were some reports Monday that Ngannou was offered Derrick Lewis on June 12th, but that timing doesn't work for him. I guess we'll have to see what they end up doing. I tend to think that they probably will make the Lewis fight. I don't know if that means they won't make the Jones fight at some point afterward, but I don't anticipate, and we don't really know, we're all sort of being careful here, weighing the evidence, but I don't anticipate that the Jones fight is next. Here's what's going to get interesting. If he did that interview a year ago, it's now April, right? So let's say he did it late March, early April of 2020, which means we were sort of like very early in the pandemic. He was still coming off that win, the very controversial win over Dominic Reyes, just that past February, if memory serves, right? So he was still basking in the glow of a win. Very controversial. I thought Dominic Reyes won, but you get the idea there. He says in this interview he wouldn't mind sitting out for a long period of time. Well, a year of that has passed, BC, and you see his frustration on Twitter, understandably, and you wonder, could he really keep this up another 2 years? I don't know. I think he'll keep it up, BC. This is my official guess, and that's all it can be, is just a guess. I think he'll keep this up a little while longer. I really do, and I think UFC will go to other choices with Francis because Big Francis wants to compete, and he wants to make money, which is understandable as well. After that, I think Jones will come around, and there might be some minor concessions in his direction. That's my official guess on this whole thing.
I mean, do you think that as much as we are emotionally charged for two purposes, one, Jones and Ngannou seems like the next fight, right? It just makes sense. Jon gave up his title and moved up. We now have this red-hot champion in Ngannou. I mean, it just feels super fight right now. The other half of it is us sort of saying, look, fighters deserve it, man. And if you, like we said the last few weeks, if you can't pay Jon for this fight, big-time money, who are you ever going to pay for a big fight ever, right? But that's sort of an emotional side of it. Is it actually smarter for the promotion to put this thing off, not a year or 2 years, but sort of put it for the end of the year, know they have more time to negotiate with Jon, and try to sort of maximize on the potential? Because look, as much as we all saw what we saw with Ngannou, we have no idea what Jones and Ngannou will actually look like when it happens. Would it be smarter for the promotion to run Ngannou into Derrick Lewis, run Ngannou into the next guy in line, with the thought process being, if he could be active and be explosive as he's been, and look, let's be honest, who the hell has survived his punch except for Stipe the first fight and Derrick Lewis in that really weird fight that, let's scrap it from memory. It never happened, Luke. Okay, it never happened. It's Rocky V, okay? It never freaking happened. Nobody's been able to stand in the heat of that kitchen. Is it actually smarter for the UFC to get Francis in there 2 more times through the summer, if they can, and set this thing up for like Allegiant Stadium, December, let's say, Jon and Ngannou, and give them more time to get to whatever that middle ground number is in the impasse between them and what Jon Jones believes he is worth, so that we can make this fight happen? Because it's never going to happen at the UFC's price. It's obviously never going to happen at Jon's price. There is a middle ground, you'd have to believe, where something can happen.
I don't know. I think that they might be happy if they can keep Francis active and he can keep winning, to just say, we can do this, and because we have so many other plates we're spinning that are doing really well for us, we can just sort of say we're going to make money on this fight, but or at least let's say we're going to make money on Francis's heavyweight title campaign, but perhaps not as much as we could, because we don't want to be leveraged by the existing talent, which is really what this is all about. Once you get leveraged, the idea would be, if you can get leveraged once, you can get leveraged multiple times, and they're trying to draw a line in the sand and basically put a stop to that. Dude, you're asking, do I think that that could go on for a while, especially if Francis is getting them out pretty quick? I mean, Derrick Lewis is one, but let's see what happens after that. Most of the time when Francis fights, they don't go very long. If he can keep that up, I think they're happy to just keep him busy, dude. I honestly believe that. And then when Jones and Ngannou happens, let's say another year from now, or a year and a half even, and they made some minor concession to Jon, and the fight doesn't do as well as it could have because it's, maybe past the expiration date, or there's other contenders or whatever, they could even look back and be like, you see, it's a big fight, but it wasn't as big as everyone said. We didn't need to do that. This worked out when it was supposed to work out. And I can understand. And they hold so many cards. Last thing on this, they hold so many cards that they can play a bunch of different hands at the same time in terms of their goals and ambitions.
I think that this is an interesting story to follow for a lot of reasons. One, I think you just nailed out an interesting scenario that they can just kind of wait it out and do the I told you so. See, we didn't have to pay that transcendent athlete that we call the GOAT out of one side of our mouth, but then out of the other side try to, break down why he doesn't deserve more than 20% of the night's pay on that night. But I wonder, Luke, because UFC never marinates. Marinating is a term that we unfortunately use in boxing when it comes to promoters having a great fight in front of them, realizing that great fight isn't at its financial maximum point, and taking the chance of doing the long-term booking. Obviously, the greatest example of that is Mayweather-Pacquiao, where I can't say this enough, Luke. The powers that be in boxing are so freaking lucky, Al Heyman, Bob Arum, that Mayweather-Pacquiao came around again to still matter 5.5 years later, considering that Pacquiao had lost twice in between, including a one-punch flatlining knockout against Marquez, yet 5.5 years later, they were still number 1 and 2 pound for pound, 1 and 2 in their generation, 1 and 2 in the welterweight ranking, so it still happened. It came too late, whatever. But the whole marinating term did first come from Bob Arum when he had a chance to make Yuriorkis Gamboa against Juan Manuel Lopez in this great featherweight showdown in 2013, and he waited, and Lopez got knocked out twice, and he got trashy, and we never saw the fight. We don't see that in UFC. They control all the cards. They can make the fight tomorrow if they want to, whatever. But you mentioned, could they give Jon a concession in the meantime? What if they look at this as, this fight's going to be massive either way, but could it be more massive in a year from now if we build Ngannou's star, like I just mentioned, even more by giving him quick Mike Tyson-like knockout potential possibilities, and then offer Jon the concession of a very winnable pay-per-view headlining heavyweight debut? Luke, you weren't knowing me all too well in 2012 when I worked at ESPN as a backup MMA and boxing editor, but I once proclaimed out into the ether sphere of life that one day Jon Jones will make his heavyweight debut, and it will come against Brock Lesnar, and he'll win that fight by head kick knockout and make a lot of money doing it. Somehow, I don't know, 10 years later, this fight, it's still there, Luke. Do you think they could do something like that where they say, let's keep Jon happy, let's give him a soft launch into heavyweight, let's give him those millions he thinks he deserves, we'll call up Brock because we're going public with the stock and people love casual crossover fights, that one's it. I mean, I'm just wondering if we see, when we talk about going public, what will that change? How will that change UFC matchmaking? I don't want it to change where we go to boxing levels, Luke, where we start slow pacing shit, all right? I don't need that.
Yeah, Although you could get there, I do wonder, is there something to this? And then, by the way, it should be noted that Francis has said, according to TMZ, when asked, like, do you think Jon deserves more money? He's unequivocal in his support. He says, as far as negotiation, yeah, he's asking for money. He said, show me the money. But I think that makes sense, Ngannou said. I think for a mega fight, everyone would like to have a mega pay, same as mine. I want that fight. I would like to have good pay. And every other fighter out there would like that. There's nothing irrational in this. Everything is normal. Everybody's expecting that we are doing this in order to one day have a big payday, a big fight day. When it comes to that moment, you are like, I wish I had what I wanted. So I believe in it. I see, show me the money for me. Prove to me he really wants it. Or if you show the money, he's going to fight. So I want to give credit to Francis for not dumping on his opponent. More to the point, though, BC, if they offered him Lesnar, that's kind of interesting, right? Because Lesnar sells a ton of pay-per-view buys, even now. He's something pretty significant. Is part of the reason Jon wants more money is that he doesn't trust the sales ability of Francis? Like, if, in other words, if he asked him, what would you make more on, fighting Francis or fighting Brock? The answer is going to be probably fighting Brock. And if you do that and they didn't raise your pay, you just got more because there was more money to be made by virtue of the aggregate sales. So percentage stayed the same. Maybe that might solve his problem. Is this sort of an indictment on Francis a little bit?
I don't think so. I think this is just Jon waking up and realizing I've been a headliner forever. I've made some big fights that have done pretty damn well on pay-per-view. Not Conor, not Brock levels, but pretty damn good. And even in my biggest, most recent ones, I'm only clearing $4 to $5 million. Yet our friends across the street in boxing, who have a much different system and a much different pay percentage, these guys are getting huge numbers for sometimes winnable pay-per-view fights in which they won't take damage. So why do I need to move up and fight the most dangerous? I mean, I like that Jon is straight up saying, look, like this could be the fight that I get wrecked, and I'm willing to take that risk and that challenge. But something's got to change. And I do agree with that. And look, this all leads us back, I think, to a story that was just printed in the last 24 hours online. Did you see Bloody Elbows? John Nash put out a very educational story based on Jon Jones's claim last year about why can't he make the same money, let's say, Deontay Wilder made in the Tyson Fury pay-per-view rematch, sort of a certain block guarantee. Why can't he make that? Did you read this, Luke?
I did.
So it was educational from John Nash, who always does great in these topics, from the standpoint of like, here's boxing structure, here's the UFCs, here's all the advantages they have, here's why boxing is potentially handicapped by the Ali rule, right? And why UFC and boxing have different structures there and there's more cooks in the kitchen. But I think one thing that was interesting in there, Luke, is that he did bring up this fact. Guys like Wilder made some of those big purses, but the promoters did lose money on some of those fights, like when Wilder took that big paycheck to fight Dominic Breazeale on Showtime, and everybody was hoping this was the setup fight to get them to the Fury rematch. Well, it was. And then supposedly, in theory, everyone will cash in at the Fury rematch. We don't see UFC put themselves in a position where they could potentially take a loss on things because, as Jon rightfully indicated in that story, they are so in wealth from this ESPN deal. Kudos to them for signing it, by the way, but they make a profit as long as they put on the minimum number of shows, no matter if they don't sell anything, if the ratings suck, if the pay-per-view bombs, they're already in the profit there. So they're at an advantage boxing isn't. So should that tell you, Luke, that we should be harder against the UFC for not taking these chances? Or does that tell you, what does that tell you?
It tells you that, yes, there are structural reasons why Jon makes what he makes, and some of those are understandable and fair, and some of those are understandable and not fair. And drawing a line between those can be difficult. But nowhere in the article, it's a great article, I agree, but the idea, yes, to get UFC to pay more from a structural, which lever can we pull standpoint, Jon doesn't really have very great options. There's a couple of things you could do with a public social media campaign combined with sitting things out, combined with whatever, but they're not especially effective. So in that sense, it's explanatory in terms of why Jon makes what he makes. But I just want everyone to be clear. These circumstances, none of them are permanent. They just are what they are at the moment, to the extent that people are willing to try new strategies or change the circumstances. Then the purses change. I want folks to be very clear about this. None of these are immutable laws of the universe or gravity. It's just what the laws are and then how they change the dynamic in the industry and what incentives they create. So, is Jon going to get more money from the UFC? Only if UFC somehow decides that they kind of want to, despite not really having much of a inclination or frankly a need to in terms of their leverage position, which is why I'm a little bit down on the idea that it will, although one never knows.
But what about that specific thing that John Nash uncovered there? Look, boxing promoters have to, they take the risk. That's why the promoters are important, right? They take the risk. They put the money up front to put on the big shows and hope that the combination of the live gate and the pay-per-view sales pay back the large purses that they guarantee to the fighters, right? Fighters have more built-in bonuses, let's say, than most UFC fighters have. Very few have pay-per-view points in the UFC. But what John's point in that there was, Wilder made these big purses, but promoters had to take big chances. In fact, they had to lose money in some fights to set up to make money after. Are we asking too much of the UFC, knowing the control they have, to say, why are you not taking more, big chances to pay your fighters? Obviously, we both believe the fighters deserve more, but from a business structure, UFC would laugh at us with that argument, right?
Right, but then again, this is not a difficult argument to make. When we talk about fighter revenue as what share it is, we're not merely talking about rank and file, guys who are happy to get a $4,000 check, Venom check, not Reebok. We're talking about everyone. The entirety of how much they pay out every year is 20%. Now, to your point, there are a different set of incentives in boxing that create for fighter benefit, in that particular case, these huge purses, because the promoter has to take a series of short-term risks for some long-term payout that UFC's not in that same position. Sure. So I don't think, given the structure of things as it currently stands, you can really make a strong argument for Jon to match Deontay Wilder pay. But that was never really the argument. The argument was not, does Jon deserve penny for penny everything Deontay got? The argument was basically that, could the UFC pay, it would depend on what your definition of substantially more is, but could they pay more, satisfy Jon's curiosity, and still, for them, make a fuck ton of money? Dude, if you go from 20% as an overall percentage, let's say, and then 35%, that's a pretty fucking big increase. That's significant. And so, I don't know if you get to 50, I don't know if you get to 25 million or 20 million for Deontay Wilder, BC, but you probably get 2x or 1.5x of what Jon's been getting. And again, I think you'd be pretty happy with that. 2x on what you've been making, most Americans would take that deal.
Well, here's the reality that's hard for us as fans of all combat sports. This reality, Luke, until MMA figures out, or really until UFC figures out how to pay the fighters what they actually deserve and still pull off their goals of expansion and pay off all their celebrity investors and all that stuff, Luke, here's what we're going to deal with. The fact that Francis Ngannou just had the biggest win of his MMA career, and yet what have the headlines been in the last 3 days? Not all about Jon Jones. They've been about Francis open to the idea of boxing Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. Promoter Eddie Hearn open to the idea of matching Dillian White against Francis Ngannou. Luke, at the end of the day, even though MMA and UFC in particular is the more dolled up, legitimate, cleaned up, and entertainment delivering product than boxing is across the board for many reasons, most due to the control that UFC owns over everything, which that John Nash article really broke down in layman's terms. Yet at the end of the day, their biggest stars are still looking to cash themselves out in something in which they would, on paper, have no chance of winning, because that's the market we're in. That you can be great and be a UFC champion. Ngannou just climbed the damn mountain, Luke, but instead of talking the realistic options of Jon Jones next, including Stipe before he lost to Francis, people are still talking about, well, I'd love to go over there and fight Fury or Joshua and get a taste of their money, even though I'm guaranteed to lose. That's an indictment on your sport, Luke, if you're an MMA only fan, that we're at this crossroads. That somebody even like Conor McGregor, who reached a level of commercial height nobody did in 2016, a level of leverage against the UFC that nobody has ever enjoyed and may never again, and still until things change, he still had to go to boxing to make the life-changing payday, Luke. How do you fix that broken issue?
Ali Act, lawsuit, unionization, or you don't. You don't. This is a situation that we come to all the time. This is why I always tell folks who become fans of the sport, you got to figure out pretty quickly, who's making what kind of money in this industry and how, and then how you change that. It's not going to be easy. The UFC is an entrenched, very powerful, business. They're not breaking any laws. They're operating above board, but they're also taking advantage of the way the laws are structured and the incentives are structured, and in many ways creating them. And this is what you're going to get. So I always go back to folks. You want to get more money. You want it to fit. You want the situation to be different than it is. However, you wish to remedy that, you have to structurally change the industry, and nothing less will work. No, there's no half measure. There's no nothing. It's either go big or go home, or just keep doing what you're doing, which is some guys can make money this way. You can make good money this way. But are you making the money that you're supposed to be? I think that is the issue.
The toughest division in MMA goes to battle in the best tournament yet. As two-division champ Ryan Darth Bader.
Oh, look at what Bader can do.
Clashes with Counter-Strike artist Lyoto Machida.
Knee strike by Machida.
Who will reign on the road to gold. The Bellator MMA Light Heavyweight World Grand Prix kicks off Friday, April 9th on Showtime.